If you truly want to build strong attraction with a woman and create the kind of connection she actually feels, but may not always express, then understanding how to approach physical intimacy with patience matters more than most men realize. Many men overlook this completely. They rush. They skip important moments. They assume that moving faster will create more excitement, when in reality, it often does the opposite. It breaks the flow, reduces the tension, and makes the interaction feel less natural instead of more. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a simple process that helps you understand how attraction actually builds in real moments. Not through force, not through speed, but through timing, awareness, and gradual progression. Most men think it's about getting straight to the point. They believe that once the moment feels right, the best thing to do is to act immediately. But what they don't understand is that what feels like the right moment to them is often just the beginning of what she needs to feel. And when you skip that build-up, you don't just move things forward. You weaken the experience. Because attraction is not created in the action itself. It's created in the anticipation that leads to it. When you slow down, when you allow the moment to develop naturally, and when each step builds on the one before it, the entire interaction feels stronger, more engaging, and more real. That's what creates a lasting impression. So instead of focusing on doing more, what you need to understand is how to do things in the right order, at the right pace, and in a way that actually matches how attraction develops. And once you understand that, everything starts to feel easier. Now that you understand the importance of pacing, the next thing you need to see clearly is the mistake that causes most of the problems in the first place. Most men move too fast. And the reason they do it is not because they are careless. It usually comes from the opposite. They feel the moment, they feel the connection, and they assume that acting quickly will strengthen it. From their perspective, it makes sense. If things feel good, why wait? But this is where the misunderstanding happens. What feels like the right moment to you is often just the beginning of what she is experiencing. While you are already thinking about moving forward, she is still processing the connection, still building comfort, and still responding to the emotional side of the interaction. When you move ahead of that process, you break the alignment. And once that alignment is broken, the interaction changes. You might not notice it immediately, but she does. Her body reacts before she says anything. She becomes slightly more reserved, her responses become shorter, and the natural flow you had a moment ago starts to feel less smooth. This is what most men describe as the moment. Something just felt off. But it didn't happen randomly. It happened because the pacing didn't match. Another reason this mistake is so common is because many men focus on results instead of experience. They think in terms of what should happen next, instead of what is happening right now. That mindset creates pressure, and that pressure shows up in how they act. Attraction does not grow under pressure. It grows when there is space for it to develop. When you slow down and pay attention to how she is responding in the moment, everything becomes clearer. You start noticing whether she is relaxed, whether she is engaged, and whether the interaction is naturally moving forward. And when you match that pace instead of trying to control it, the experience becomes much stronger for both of you. That's the difference. Not doing more, but doing it at the right time. Now that you understand the mistake, the next step is understanding what actually works in its place. And this is where most men are surprised. Because attraction is not driven by action as much as it is driven by anticipation. What creates intensity is not what happens. It's what is about to happen. That space between moments, where nothing is rushed and everything is allowed to build naturally, is where the real connection forms. When you move too quickly, you remove that space. You skip over the part where her body and mind are catching up to the moment. Instead of allowing the experience to develop, you compress it. And when that happens, the feeling becomes weaker, not stronger. Research in human behavior has shown that anticipation plays a major role in emotional response and engagement. When something builds gradually, it creates more focus, more awareness, and a stronger reaction overall. That same principle applies here. When you take your time, small actions become more meaningful. A simple touch, a slight change in tone, or even a pause in conversation starts to carry more weight. She becomes more aware of what's happening, and that awareness increases her emotional response. But when everything happens too fast, those moments lose their impact. They blur together. And instead of feeling something build, it just feels like something happened. That's the difference between intensity and speed. Another important part of this is attention. When there is anticipation, her attention stays fully engaged. She is focused on the moment, on what you are doing, and on what might happen next. That level of focus makes the experience feel more real and more memorable. When there is no anticipation, her attention doesn't stay in the same way. There is nothing to follow, nothing to build toward. So the experience feels flatter. Once you understand this, your entire approach changes. You stop trying to move things forward quickly. You start allowing each moment to lead into the next. And when you do that, you are no longer forcing attraction. You are building it. The first step, and the foundation of everything that follows, is learning how to build the moment slowly instead of jumping ahead. This is where most men go wrong. They feel a connection. They sense that something is happening, and they immediately try to move closer or escalate the situation. But what they don't realize is that the moment they do that, they skip over the most important part of the experience, the build-up. Attraction is not something that appears instantly at full intensity. It develops in layers. Each small moment adds to the next, and that gradual progression is what creates a stronger emotional response. When you rush, you remove those layers. Instead of letting the interaction grow, you compress it into something that feels incomplete. So what does a slow build-up actually look like? It starts with staying present in the interaction instead of thinking ahead. You focus on the conversation, on the energy between you, and on how she is responding. You allow small moments to exist without immediately trying to turn them into something bigger. For example, instead of trying to move GDK forward as soon as you feel a connection, you let that connection settle. You give it space. You allow a moment of eye contact to last a little longer. You let a pause in the conversation happen without rushing to fill it. GDK things matter more than they seem. They create a sense of tension, but not the kind that feels uncomfortable. GGK engaging, the kind that keeps both of you present in the moment. Another important part of this step is restraint, not holding back in a forced way, but choosing not to rush. When you show that you are comfortable letting things develop at their own pace, it creates a different kind of energy. It shows confidence, and it makes the interaction feel more balanced. When a woman feels that you are not trying to push the moment forward, she relaxes more. She becomes more open, and that openness allows everything else to build naturally. This step might seem simple, but it changes everything. Because once the buildup is there, everything that follows feels stronger without needing extra effort. Once the buildup is in place, the next step is understanding how to introduce touch in a way that feels natural instead of forced. This is where many men make another mistake. They go from no contact straight into strong or obvious physical interaction. That sudden shift can feel unnatural because it skips the gradual progression that creates comfort. Instead of building on the moment, it interrupts it. The key here is subtlety. Touch should begin lightly, almost to the point where it feels secondary to the interaction itself. It should not feel like the focus. It should feel like a natural extension of the moment you are already sharing. For example, a brief touch during conversation, something casual and relaxed, is often far more effective than anything intense or deliberate. The goal is not to create a big reaction immediately, but to introduce physical presence in a way that feels easy and unforced. When touch is light, it allows her to process it comfortably. There is no pressure. There is no sudden shift in energy. It simply becomes part of the interaction. Another important detail is duration. Short, controlled contact is usually more effective than prolonged or heavy contact in the early stages. It keeps the interaction balanced and prevents things from feeling overwhelming. It also leaves room for anticipation, which, as you already understand, is a key part of building attraction. You also need to pay attention to her response. Does she remain relaxed? Does she stay engaged in the conversation? Does her body language remain open? These signals tell you whether the moment is aligned or not. If everything continues to flow naturally, then you know you are moving at the right pace. If the energy changes or feels slightly off, that is a sign to slow down again. This step is not about doing more. It is about doing less, but doing it with awareness. Because when touch is introduced in the right way, it doesn't stand out. It fits. And when it fits, it becomes part of the natural progression, instead of something that disrupts it. Before anything can build further, there's one factor that matters more than technique, timing, or even confidence, and that is emotional comfort. Most men underestimate this completely. They focus on what they should do, how they should act, and when they should move forward. But what they don't realize is that none of that works if she doesn't feel comfortable in the moment. Attraction does not grow in tension that feels uncertain or pressured. It grows in an environment where she feels safe, relaxed, and understood. That doesn't come from doing something complicated. It comes from how you communicate, how you carry yourself, and how present you are during the interaction. Simple things make a big difference. The way you listen when she speaks. The way you respond without rushing. The way your tone stays calm and steady instead of trying too hard to impress. All of these small details create a sense of ease that allows her to stay in the moment instead of analyzing it. Another important part of emotional comfort is reassurance. Not in an exaggerated or forced way, but in a natural and genuine way. When she feels that she is appreciated, that she is being seen without judgment, her level of comfort increases. That comfort allows her to relax, and when she relaxes, her body becomes more open and responsive. Without that, everything feels incomplete. Even if the interaction seems to be going well on the surface, a lack of emotional comfort creates distance. She may still engage, but she won't fully invest in the moment. That's why this step is so important. It's not about saying the perfect thing or trying to control the situation. It's about creating an environment where the interaction feels easy, where there is no pressure, and where she can respond naturally. When that foundation is there, everything else becomes simpler. Because now you're not trying to build attraction from nothing. You're allowing it to grow in a space where it actually can. Once emotional comfort is there, and the interaction feels natural, the next step is understanding how to move things forward without breaking the flow. This is where controlled progression comes in. Most men think progression means making a move at the right time, and then quickly building on it. But the reality is very different. Progression is not about speed, it is about sequence. Each step should feel like it naturally follows the one before it. When progression is controlled, nothing feels sudden. There are no sharp changes in energy. Everything feels connected. For example, instead of jumping from a comfortable moment straight into something more intense, you allow smaller transitions to happen. You stay present. You observe how she is responding. And you move forward in a way that matches that response. This is what keeps the interaction aligned. When you move too far ahead of her pace, even slightly, it creates a disconnect. The moment no longer feels shared. It feels like something is being pushed forward instead of developing naturally. Controlled progression avoids that completely. Another important detail is consistency. Each step should reinforce the previous one. If the interaction is calm and relaxed, your progression should reflect that. If the energy becomes slightly more engaging, your movement can follow that shift, but it should never jump ahead of it. Think of it as building something step by step. You don't skip levels. You don't rush to the end. You allow each stage to exist fully before moving to the next. This also creates a stronger sense of trust. When she feels that you are not rushing or forcing anything, she becomes more comfortable allowing the interaction to develop. That comfort leads to openness, and that openness is what allows the connection to deepen naturally. Most men don't lose the moment because they did something wrong. They lose it because they move too far ahead too quickly. Controlled progression prevents that. It keeps everything smooth, balanced, and aligned. And when everything stays aligned, the interaction becomes much more natural and much more effective without requiring extra effort. Once progression is in place, the next step is understanding how to keep the interaction engaging instead of predictable. This is where variation becomes important. One of the fastest ways to lose momentum is to become repetitive. When everything feels the same, the interaction starts to lose its intensity. There is nothing new to respond to, nothing that keeps attention fully engaged. And over time, the experience begins to feel flat. Attraction, on the other hand, responds strongly to contrast. Small changes in pace, tone, and interaction create a sense of unpredictability that keeps her attention focused. This does not mean doing something dramatic or constantly changing what you are doing. It means making subtle adjustments that prevent the interaction from becoming one-dimensional. For example, if everything feels slow and calm, maintaining that for too long without any variation can reduce its impact. But if you introduce slight changes, like shifting from conversation to a quieter moment, or adjusting the pace of interaction slightly, it creates a different kind of engagement. These small changes keep the experience dynamic. Another important detail is balance. Variation should not feel random or inconsistent. It should still follow the flow of the interaction. If the energy between you is relaxed, your variation should stay within that range. If it becomes more engaging, your adjustments can reflect that. But they should always feel connected to what is already happening. The goal is not to surprise her. The goal is to keep her attention. When the interaction has this kind of balance, it becomes much easier for her to stay present. She is not predicting what will happen next, but she is also not confused by it. It feels natural, but still engaging. Most men either stay too predictable or become too inconsistent. The key is staying in between. When you understand how to introduce small variations without breaking the flow, the interaction becomes more interesting, without requiring extra effort. And that is what keeps attraction building instead of fading. By this point, you understand build-up, light touch, emotional comfort, progression, and variation. But there is one element that ties all of this together and determines whether the interaction feels smooth or disconnected. That element is rhythm. Most men don't think about rhythm at all. They focus on what to do next, instead of how everything flows from one moment to the next. As a result, their actions feel uneven. They might be slow at one moment, then suddenly speed up, then pause awkwardly, then try to recover. That inconsistency breaks the experience. Rhythm is what prevents that. When your movements, your tone, and your pacing follow a steady flow, everything feels more natural. There are no sudden shifts, no interruptions, and no moments that feel out of place. Instead, the interaction develops in a way that feels continuous. Think of it like a conversation that flows effortlessly. There are no forced pauses, no rushed responses, and no awkward jumps. Everything connects. That same principle applies here. Another important part of rhythm is consistency. Once you establish a certain pace, you need to maintain it long enough for it to feel stable. Constantly changing speed or intensity creates confusion instead of engagement. But when the rhythm is steady, her body begins to relax into it. She can follow it without thinking, which allows her to stay present instead of trying to figure out what is happening. This is where attraction becomes easier. Because now you are not trying to create something new in every moment. You are allowing the flow you have already built to continue. There is also a natural progression within rhythm. You can start slow and gradually build. But the key is that the change happens smoothly. There are no sharp jumps. Everything increases in a way that feels connected to what came before. Most men lose the moment because their rhythm is inconsistent. They rush, they hesitate, and they break the flow. When you maintain a steady rhythm, everything stays aligned. And when everything stays aligned, the interaction feels natural, controlled, and much more engaging without needing extra effort. At this point, everything comes together. You've seen how build-up creates the foundation, how light and controlled touch introduces connection, how emotional comfort allows her to relax, how progression keeps things aligned, how variation keeps her engaged, and how rhythm holds everything in place. Now, the final step is not about adding something new. It's about combining everything you've already learned into one smooth, natural flow. This is where most men make one last mistake. They try to switch into a different mode. They think, now I need to do something bigger, or now I need to make something happen. But that shift is exactly what breaks the moment, because nothing new is required. If you followed the process correctly, the interaction is already moving forward on its own. All you need to do is stay consistent, stay present, stay aligned with the pace that has already been established. When everything is combined correctly, the experience feels effortless. There is no pressure, no confusion, and no need to force anything. Each moment naturally leads into the next, because the foundation has already been built. Another important detail here is awareness. Even at this stage, you still need to pay attention to how she is responding. Attraction is not something you assume. It's something you continue to observe in real time. If she remains relaxed, engaged, and open, then everything is moving in the right direction. If the energy shifts, you adjust. Not by stopping completely, but by returning to the pace that feels natural again. That flexibility is what keeps the interaction balanced. Now here is the bigger picture. Attraction is not about doing more. It's about understanding how the moment develops and allowing it to unfold without rushing ahead of it. When you understand that, everything becomes simpler. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop overthinking. You start responding to what is actually happening instead of what you think should happen next. And that is what creates a stronger, more natural connection. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where things were going well, but then something changed and you couldn't explain why? Drop your experience in the comments. I read them, and I respond to as many as I can. And if this helped you understand attraction on a deeper level, make sure you subscribe. Because in the next video, I'm going to show you something that connects directly to this. Not just how to build attraction, but how to recognize the exact moment she wants you to move forward. And missing that moment is where most men lose everything they already had.